Thanks so much for being here tonight. I'm really thrilled to be here on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. So if someone asked you to name a Jewish artist, or an artist whose Judaism is an integral aspect of their work, who would you name? So we have a lot of Jewish artists here, so I'm hearing, I'm guessing the answer in this room might be different than in the general population, but I think if you went to a Starbucks or a mall or a school and asked people that question, you might get a lot of this answer, which I did hear someone say over there. Certainly Marc Chagall was the first person I would think of if this question was asked of me. So when you think of Marc Chagall, what do you think of? You think of a Russian shtetl in the sky, right? Flying cows and musicians and brides and grooms, sacred Jewish objects. And in this work, which is called White Crucifixion, we have Jesus on the cross wearing a talit and some Hebrew letters over him. And there's a Torah scroll burning, and a synagogue is burning, and there is a nefarious figure dressed in brown in front of that burning synagogue. And this work was made in 1938, which was the year that Kristallnacht happened. Books about Chagall's work were burned by the Nazis, not surprisingly, beginning in 1933. And I mention that year because Chagall said something that year that really sets up what I want to talk about tonight. If a painter is a Jew and paints life, how is he to keep Jewish elements out of his work? But if he is a good painter, his painting will contain a great deal more. The Jewish content will be there, of course, but his art will aim at universal relevance. Chagall was born in 1887 in Belarus and moved permanently to France in 1923, but he returned again and again in his work to the Jewish world of his Russian childhood, and his work is inextricably linked to his Judaism. But then, what about this artist? Is there anything about Mark Rothko's abstractions that say Jewish to you? Rothko was born in Latvia in 1903. He lived there until his family immigrated to the US when he was about 10. His early memories of the anti-Semitism that he experienced stayed with him. He began as a figurative artist, and his early works often reflected Jewish identity. Around 1941, with the Nazi atrocities increasing against the Jews, Rothko's work changed. He began to use a lot of Greek and Christian iconography, and there were subtle references to Jewish burial practices, subtle references, because this was a time when he didn't want to necessarily be identified as a Jew. He changed his name from Rothkowitz, and he didn't want his artwork to be typecast as Jewish art either. He's best known, though, for his abstract work, like the one here. So beyond the fact that being in front of a Rothko work can actually be a very spiritual experience if you've had the good fortune to do that, nothing about this really says Jewish to me. But, although it is a bit dark, even these color field paintings that he started making in the 1950s can and have been viewed as profound meditations on the Holocaust. They've been read by some critics as having associations with the images of mass graves from the concentration camps that became public after the war. And even though they're often named for their colors, for instance, this is black on gray, there's a lot more to it, obviously. And Rothko said, "I'm interested only in expressing basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and so on." So to me, the doom feels really visceral in many of his works, including this one. and also in black on maroon, which you may have seen in New York in the Seagram building. Those panels have been described as doorways to hell and have been compared to the rings of flames, and critics have pointed out the obvious Holocaust resonance in those perceptions. Okay, now what about this artist? So I didn't know for years that Amedeo Modigliani was Jewish. When I was young, I recognized his work, but didn't know he was a Jew. So what about these narrow, elongated faces could possibly be read as being infused with Judaism or informed by Judaism? I mean, other than the fact that this painting is actually called The Jewish Woman. Modigliani was a Sephardic Jew born in Livorno, Italy in 1884, and he died very young and impoverished in Paris in 1920. And there was an exhibition of his work at New York's Jewish Museum in 2017 called Modigliani Unmasked, and it took a deep dive into his Judaism. So this was one of the items on display. It was a copy because the original was stolen in 1977. This is Self-Portrait with Beard. It's a 1910 sketch, pencil on paper, and it looks nothing like Modigliani's typical figures. The curator of the exhibition, Mason Klein, told the reporter that this self-portrait is a sort of smoking gun when it comes to the question of Modigliani's Judaism. Klein said he's depicting himself as an Orthodox Jew. So I began thinking a lot about this question, what makes a Jewish artist's work Jewish, when I bumped into Carol Crenna at a reception at the Vancouver Art Gallery for something that had absolutely nothing to do with being Jewish, but a lot to do with art. We started talking, and she told me about this project for the Scribe, that she was working on an issue devoted to Jewish visual artists in British Columbia that would not only look at their work, but also investigate their connections to Judaism. So I thought at the time, how many Jewish artists could there be in British Columbia? Enough for a whole magazine? Yes, as it turns out, and many more, and with a lot of talent. So I've been lucky enough to have my hands on an early version of the Scribe, and I can tell you the work is so beautifully presented and also very thought-provoking. It really got me wondering about how, as an artist of any sort, but specifically visual artist, does one's Judaism, whether it's religious or cultural, have an impact on their artistic creations? So sometimes it can be fairly obvious. Hinda Avery was one of the first people I thought of when I learned about this project. I had interviewed her a few years ago when she was showing some work at the Culture, and I just fell in love with her art. And with her, actually, she's amazing. Like, look at this amazing piece, these joyous older women pointing their guns at those Nazis. The women are laughing and smiling. The Nazis are stiff and stern and mean. They're lifeless in a way, they're posed. They're like grotesque relics and stuck in the most horrific time. But the women are full of life and movement. They're completely unrestrained in their t-shirts and shorts. And Hinda sees these women as superheroes. She named them the Rosen Resistors, and she's painted them in a number of scenarios. This is another one with Hinda, so joyous in front of it. In that interview in 2015, Hinda said to me, "Eventually I got tired of us being victims and decided to paint us being very confident, feisty, brave, and having a good time rounding up Hitler and his henchmen." And I love that. In thinking about Jewish artists in BC whose Judaism or their Jewish background informs their work, another artist who came to mind immediately before I started researching was Olga Campbell. So Olga was born in Baghdad and lives in Vancouver. She's a child of Holocaust survivors. Her parents were imprisoned in the camps And during the war, her mother gave birth to a baby who died, so that was Olga's sibling. I heard about Olga's book, A Whisper Across Time, when I was writing my own book about the Holocaust and intergenerational trauma, and I reached out to Olga, and we had a remarkable conversation about her family story and her art. This piece that we're looking at is called Behind Wire. So Olga told me when we spoke that she was overwhelmed with very disturbing feelings that left her distraught. And as she was seeking help, she became aware of this need to write this book, which is both text and artwork. It's over there up for auction if you want. I get maybe the bidding's closed, but buy it if you can. What she said to me was, those feelings from the time I started writing the book, they went away. So making art can be a healing process, but it shouldn't be mistaken as merely therapy. This is a very valid artistic endeavor. So another person I thought of when Carol told me about this project was a woman I've been sitting next to, Penina Grenier, a woman I was, again, mostly familiar with as an author because I have her book, but she's also a prolific and amazing visual artist. So looking at this painting, Adieu le Paradis, knowing Penina had made it, I came up with a story in my head for it. I didn't talk to any of the artists before I wrote this tonight, and you'll see why. So when I looked at it, I thought of a couple in love during the Holocaust. The vibrant pink of the flowers represented life and love to me, but the couple in black and white suggested to me a strong feeling of doom. So this was informed, no doubt, by what I know about Penina's story, that her parents had survived the war in Romania. And there's a story in her book, Light Within the Shadows, that has really stayed with me, and I hope it's okay if I share it. After she broke up with her longtime gallery, she had a dream that she was on a crowded train, that everyone was getting off, that she couldn't find her bags, and she was trapped on this train alone, and suddenly she was going to an unknown destination, and she was in an absolute panic. So she realized after she woke up and wasn't able to get this nightmare out of her head for days that her security blanket as an artist, this gallery, had been yanked away, and she felt bereft and abandoned and lost. To me, a very relevant detail is that she was on a train and that the destination is unknown and there is baggage. So I read Holocaust imagery into that story. So the Holocaust is a subject often dealt with in works by Jewish artists everywhere, obviously, and BC artists are no exception. So this is a work by Phyllis Sirota, a Victoria-based painter. It's a devastating piece, and it goes back to her experience as a 14-year-old when she first learned about the Holocaust. She'd read a book about it, and she locked herself in the bathroom and cried and felt that she would have to investigate what had happened more fully, and that story just breaks my heart. But this is another work of Phyllis's. It's called Angels and Oranges, and in this work we witness the joy of family life today and feel the loss of those who came before us, but also their presence as protectors. Carol mentioned Joyce Osier, who in the Scribe discusses her exhibition Blue Refuge, which I wish I had seen in person when it was at the Fazakis Gallery in 2015. The series was the result of Osier uncovering this fascinating Jewish history of a blue town in Morocco called Chefchaouen. So she had at first been drawn to this town because of how it looked, its magnificent visual appeal. But as she was reading about the town, she came across this one-line explanation for the unusual color, that a group of Jews running from the Nazis in the 1930s painted the town blue in gratitude for it being a safe haven. She told the Jewish Independent, after I read that line, I wanted to know their story. Well, I can tell you that after looking at Joyce Osier's work and reading her interview, I want to know that story too, and I want to know more about her. So this is a work by Marcia Pitch, a Vancouver-based multimedia artist, and she is often inspired in her work, she told the Scribe, by stories of religious persecution against Jews as well. Her grandmother told her about the pogroms she had witnessed in a part of Russia that's now Ukraine, and this had a profound impact on her as a person and an artist. And this work that we're looking at is titled Holding On. So Yom HaShoah was this week, yesterday, Monday night and yesterday. So the Holocaust is obviously top of mind. But something I learned when I was researching my book is that it is always top of mind or close to it quantitatively for Canadian Jews. There was a 2018 study that asked Jewish people in Canada what they think is essential to Jewish life. And the answer that got the second highest number of responses was remembering the Holocaust. More people said that than celebrating Jewish holidays with family or being part of a Jewish community, which really surprised me. The only thing that surpassed it was leading an ethical and moral life. But of course, our Jewish identity does not and cannot only reference and emerge from the Holocaust. There is much more to us than our greatest tragedies. I am just in love with the work of Jeannie Kamens. Look at the joy in this painting. It's called Dancing the Hora. She says that Judaism influences her as a person. It's not necessarily the subject of her work. She's an atheist, but thinks of being Jewish as having less to do with God and more to do with traditions, like dancing the Hora. I just love that. And here's another painting of hers called Shabbat. The joy in this painting is palpable. It's almost like it's in motion. While the matriarch or Bubby is blessing the Shabbat candles and the challah and wine are ready to go, the family is experiencing this great togetherness and all of that, all that comes with that. And it's set in a room, I think you can see, that's wallpapered with Jewish symbols. And then hanging on the wall is a work of art depicting nature, which is something I'm going to talk about in a bit. So this is just another gorgeous image.